It's not easy living on a dying planet, but it is easy to feel overwhelmed when it comes to making changes and taking action to try and save it. Where do you start? Is it even worth it? Can you really make a difference? Welcome to the Tea on Sustainable Living podcast, where we attempt to answer these questions by spilling the tea on living sustainably in a world that's going to shit. I'm Brandy.
And I'm Hannah. And for years we've been navigating the big, messy grey area of caring about our planet. It hasn't always been smooth sailing, but we're not giving up yet. So, brew yourself a cup of tea, get comfy, and let's try and navigate that grey area together. Hello, Give a Shitters. This is Hannah.
And this is Brandy. And you're listening to episode number 18 of the Tea on Sustainable Living podcast.
Woo! Yeah.
I feel like with each number, it's like, obviously it's the first time we've done each episode with that number, but like it's getting bigger each time, so it feels like every time like, oh, we're still doing this.
Yeah, it's quite a lot, actually. I was
Yeah.
like 18. It's like a child has grown to be an adult. Reached their 18th birthday in
9 hours of recording time.
Yeah. I'm sure, yeah, very convenient child.
Yeah. Oh. All right. So what are we talking about today, Hannah?
So we're talking about activism and protests. So there's a couple of things going on right now. We've obviously, as we're recording, COP27 is on, which is the 27th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so I think it'll just to finish when this episode comes out. I think it's like a week long, 10 days.
Yeah, something like that.
So that's happening right now in Egypt. And I was reading about how there are less protests going on or less activism than you would normally expect, because the country has a lower tolerance, shall we say, for political protests. So that's one thing that kind of made me think about talking about this for this episode. And then there's also in the last month or so, there's been quite a few protests that have made the news. There's the throwing the soup at the Van Gogh sunflowers by Just Stop Oil.
Yeah, Just Stop Oil.
It's called Just Stop Oil. In the UK, and then there were a couple of others, like in Madrid, 2 protesters stuck their hands to Goya's paintings. So that was a couple of, well, to the not to the paintings, to the frames. So that was a couple of weeks ago, and they were affiliated with Extinction Rebellion, I think.
Yeah, and Just Stop Oil is an affiliate of Extinction Rebellion as well.
Yeah. And there's also protests going on in the UK right now. There were protests which stopped some of the big motorways going into London, caused lots of traffic jams. So yeah, there's quite a few things that have come up, and especially, for example, the painting, the soup on the painting has been quite controversial. I've heard kind of a lot of things for and against, and I wanted to talk about that today. I've never been involved in any kind of direct action protest. I don't know about you, Brandy.
No, the closest is when you and I just did the climate march, which was a very well planned, organized, like large number of people just walking down a closed street.
Yeah, I've been to marches, and that's about the extent of my engagement with protesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my experience is very limited as well, near non-existent really. I'm just glad you wanted to talk about this episode, because I had heard about the Van Gogh soup incident and kind of like kept it on the periphery of my brain to like not have to like think about what I thought about it.
Well, lucky you. Today's the day, Brandy.
No, but then I watched a video which I think ties in like all of these topics quite well on YouTube by Lena Norms, titled "I Would Throw Soup at a Van Gogh Painting," and she started the video talking about why like her friends were like surprised that she had this opinion, but then the way she breaks it down, which we can talk about the various like points and the aspects of activism and protest. But yeah, so having this conversation, it helps me. It's forcing me to kind of figure out how I feel about it. And just disclaimer, I'm not well educated on this and the history of protests and activism. My preferred form of activism is having a podcast about climate change and sustainability. So I think it's important to talk about it, because I think that's the ultimate goal, is to like have a dialogue. There was like an article I think you just linked, and the quote that stood out for me is, "Protest should not be seen as synonymous with violence, but with dialogue among friends, between policy leaders, makers, etc." So
and I think as well, a lot of times the different types of activism and different types of protests kind of live alongside each other. Not always cohesively, but I think in general, people who people engage with these issues in a way that they feel comfortable with, and a way that they feel like called to act. And this is like the most useful or best way that they can engage with an issue. I was just thinking, I feel like I've been involved with, for example, climate action groups that have been doing actions that would definitely, but that are not what am I trying to say here? Like the types of actions that obviously make things more complicated, but aren't leading to people being at risk of being arrested. So, for example, like protests, marches, going into banks and like asking awkward questions to the people working in the banks, for example, to like divest from, why is this bank investing in this oil plant, for example, or this, that kind of thing. So, and through that, I've known people who would be engaged in more dramatic forms of action. But within those kind of spaces, like there's the whole spectrum of what people feel comfortable with and what people feel, that is the right thing for them to do. I don't know. That didn't really have much of a point. Just like, what was the point of that sentence?
I feel like, did you and I talk about like potentially wanting to like join like the local Extinction Rebellion chapter?
We did.
Did you go to a meeting?
Yeah, I did. I went to a meeting quite a long time ago. I think like a year and a half, maybe even longer. I think it was pre-COVID? Well, pre-COVID. I can't remember. So a while ago. I went to a meeting, like an introductory meeting with a friend, and then didn't take it any further. I think I would be interested in going to something again. It was something I was looking at recently.
What do you think led you to only like going to the intro meeting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think
like, did you feel like uncomfortable? Like, was it like maybe not for you, or did it seem like a lot to take on?
I think it was quite a lot, and I think that I would need to get clearer about the specific aims and what I was committing to. Yeah, what was it? That was a good question. Like, what felt like the barrier? I feel like it's a lot. There's like several different things going on with like Extinction Rebellion, right? Because they're also they're advocating, or they want net zero by 2025.
Good question.
2030. Anyway, that I will. I'm like Googling this right now, because they do have some very clear aims. But basically, I was like, there was the stuff that's like the climate action, and then they have a lot of things. They have some like political restructuring as well. So they advocate for people's forums as a way of like collective decision making. So engaging, they want that every community to have people's forums, which, and I'm not super knowledgeable. We will post their website, so please like fact check this. But basically that people come together in a form, collectively to make decisions, and they want every I don't know if it's like every city or every like place to have people's forums that then can, as far as I'm aware, that then can go to like the government and that will have an influence on political structure.
Mm-hmm.
Take that with a pinch of salt because I'm like, feel like I'm...
Well, you're looking up what you're looking
potentially...
while you're doing your Googling, if you're listening and this is the first time you're hearing of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion is a global environmental movement with the stated aim of using nonviolent civil disobedience to compel government action to avoid tipping points in the climate system, biodiversity loss, and the risk of social and ecological collapse. And Just Stop Oil, an Extinction Rebellion affiliate, is an environmental activist group in the UK using civil resistance and direct action. The group aims for the British government to commit to halting new fossil fuel licensing and production. Because I think at the time they formed this affiliate group, there were, I think Lena Norms says it in the video, like maybe 10 or 12 new projects, new licensing, fossil fuel licensing. Mm-hmm. And now I think there's like over 100.
Yeah.
So
I've just Googled, I can tell you.
Tell us.
The Extinction Rebellion, this is on the UK website, our demands. 1, tell the truth. All institutions must communicate the danger we are in. We must be clear about the extreme cascading risk humanity now faces, the injustice this represents its historic roots, and the urgent need for rapid political, social, and economic change. And then the second request is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025 and begin protecting and repairing nature immediately. And then number 3 is, which I was just talking about, decide together. We demand a culture of participation, fairness, and transparency. The government must create and be led by a citizens' assembly, sorry, not a people's forum, sorry, a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. Only the common sense of ordinary people will help us navigate the challenging decisions ahead.
I like that, the collective decision-making. I didn't know that about them, but I haven't known much about this group except for what I hear in the news. So I'd love to talk more about like this, like the soup, the throwing the soup, and then come back to what's happening at COP27.
Yes.
Because both are very interesting. So the names of the 2 activists, Phoebe and Anna, which I found online from Just Stop Oil, they threw cans of soup at a Van Gogh painting, Sunflowers. And this video by Lena Norms breaks down, like, I do recommend watching it because if you just want to like dive deeper into this specific incident. But my main takeaway I'll start with is that agreement on like how action is done is not as important as like the action, like taking action in general, the why and the end goal. Because a lot of her videos, she's talking about like, if you have a better way to go about this, please do it. Like it's like not getting caught up in like, how effective is this protest? Is this, instead of like knocking it, like do something else if you feel like it's better. So,
I think that's a really good point. It was something I really liked about what she said as well. But then it was quite interesting because I was then reading another article which was talking about, and maybe this is more about a direct action, but it was talking about the need for coherency between the actions, like how to make a protest effective. And it was talking about you need to be very clear about what you want, and that it's important that there's like communication between different groups of people who are working towards the same goal, because otherwise like the actions of one group might, you know, and what they decide is the correct thing to do might then work against what another group is saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like I heard like they did state like why they were doing this specific incident. Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about like communicating with other groups.
But I definitely recommend while you're watching videos to watch the full video of the incident where the soup is being thrown on the sunflower, because I think the words of the activists were very powerful. You know, if you move away from the action, you know, what they're saying is really important. And I think that didn't get reported really very much, what they said. It was just like, oh, young people have thrown soup at a Van Gogh painting. Oh, yeah. Oh my.
Because something else she says in the video, and if you don't know why why they threw soup and why this painting, you can watch the video and she goes into that. But basically the why is you can't use logic with people who aren't using logic. So then activists and activist groups, and I'm partially quoting the video, have to do the big shiny thing, because if they do the logical dull thing, like the thing that will actually save lives, like that doesn't get reported. Throwing soup at a Van Gogh painting is getting reported and people are talking about it. Is it in the most effective way? I don't know. That's up for debate. But like here we are talking about it.
Yeah, and I think that's true. Something else I was like write down, I was thinking about it, it's like oftentimes I think when people don't like these kind of actions, they criticize the action themselves. For example, I was reading with the protest for the on the M25, on the big motorway, and it was like,
they blocked a bridge or something.
They blocked a bridge, and so people couldn't get past. I think people were like hanging down from the bridge. And I remember I saw someone, oh, well, they don't think that it's taken me 3 hours to get to work. Think of all the gas and the pollution that's caused by me having to be sat in a traffic jam for 3 hours. And it's, gotcha. And it's just like, that's so not the point. The action that they're doing, it's not because they think the most sustainable thing for the world is to be hanging out on a bridge.
No, their goal is to disrupt. Often the goal with protests and activism, is to cause disruption. And this throwing soup at the painting doesn't cause that. So that's a point that Lena makes at why it's like not that big of a deal. And disclaimer, the painting was well protected. I think they wiped it off with like paper towels or kitchen roll, whatever you call it, immediately after. So like no harm was done to this painting.
Yeah. And I mean, but even in both situations, whether there's like some harm or disruption or like no disruption, really, to just think about the act, like,
why are they doing that?
The action isn't the point. Yeah. Like, they're not like, yes, chucking soup on a painting is solving the world problems. Obviously, they don't think that.
It's getting us to talk about it and why they're doing it.
Right. Do you think you would throw soup on a Van Gogh painting?
I would be scared of getting arrested. Like, I'm really scared of getting arrested. So I think I was asking you about your barrier of like not going back to Extinction Rebellion meetings after that intro meeting. I think my barrier to like this kind of activism in general would be like getting arrested, because which brings up like something that I learned, which I found interesting, is that that's often the goal, is to get arrested. Because if you get enough people arrested, I forget which article, but it'll probably be linked. I read that there was a specific act reference that I think their goal was to like get 3,000 people arrested, because then that would overwhelm the Metropolitan Police in London, and then the police station can then bring the issue to Parliament. So it can, like, getting arrested, getting enough people arrested can drive policy change in that way.
Yeah, that's true. Now you mentioned it, I think that was, it'd definitely be a fear for me. And it was something that I felt more aware of going to a meeting, Extinction Rebellion meeting in Spain, because it felt like the consequences could potentially be worse. Not because the Spanish police system is worse. That's not what I'm referring to, but just being like not a citizen of that country. I don't know if that's like a rational thing to be afraid of, like the impact that your arrest might have on visas and
I think that's
your living
rational
situation. So it's true. And now you mentioned, I'm like, oh yeah, it was definitely something that made me more nervous. But I'm like, is that just kind of an excuse because I don't particularly want to be arrested?
There's not one way we're going to get out of this climate crisis. There's lots of things happening at the same time. And if this kind of activism isn't for you, then it's not for you. I think I'm just kind of starting to think about getting more comfortable in just having conversations with people. That, like, whereas normally I'm like too scared to get into it because I'm not knowledgeable enough. Like, I feel like this podcast has become like my safe space, just me and you, because like we were friends before we started it. And I feel like I can express my, ignorance on topics, but like in a conversation with people, maybe I don't really know that well, out, like say at a bar, restaurant, whatever, I'm like too nervous to bring up things like I don't know a lot about. because I just don't know how it's going to go. And then if someone asks me a question, I can't immediately Google it, or just the fact that I have to Google it, like, I feel like I get easily discredited because I don't know something off the top of my head. So
I mean, I think for what it's worth, Brandy, I think you're a very knowledgeable person.
Oh, thank you.
And I think you've done more research than a lot of people have.
Thank you. I get nervous of it like turning into a debate.
Right.
So I think figuring out how to have better conversations and keep it at like as a conversation or like a healthy disagreement, and not like letting important conversations turn into like a you're right, I'm wrong, because that doesn't get anywhere.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think actually that's something that's worth bearing in mind in terms of what being part of organizations on whatever spectrum can kind of help with. And it would, whether that's more like Extinction Rebellion, direct action, or say Greenpeace, they have there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of training that they offer to people.
Yes, that was something
who are within these groups. And of course, it's also worth mentioning for example, for Extinction Rebellion, obviously we think of them and we think of the kind of, the more risky types of action. But it's true that for everything they also need the people who are willing to update their social media, to create their graphics, create their graphics, translate their resources, bring food to the people who are protesting. There are a lot of different kind of roles that are available. And it's also true, the one time that I was more involved with like an organization rather than engaging with these issues as an individual. For example, I went to training camps. I like had access to, people helping you, talk, like, how do you talk about these issues? How do you have conversations? And then they have training, everything from on that level to what do you do if you're in a protest and you're going to get arrested? Like, how do you respond? What do you need to know? So I think an important thing of like, if you're engaging in these issues, like in a group, is to really find out the ways in which that group are going to support you as an individual. If you're taking on that risk as an individual, if you're taking on a role in which, and they, they'll split it up like, okay, then these are like arrestable roles. And then these are, you decide beforehand, like, okay, I'm going to like be in the back, but when the police tell us to move on, I'm going to be one of the people who moves on. And then there'll be other people who say, no, I'm not going to move on. I'm going to get arrested. And they'll give you training. Like, what do you do in that situation? Like, what can you expect to happen? And then like, there should also be like financial support for like paying your fines.
There's a whole mental health component as well.
For sure.
I want to bring the chat back to COP27, but first I thought of, so there's another Lena Norm's video that should be live by the time this episode airs. I've joined, just full disclosure, I've joined her Patreon, so I'm in her Gumption Club, what she calls it. So I had early access to this video, but she references the Venn diagram, which I think was first brought up in How to Save the Planet podcast episode, which is now Spotify exclusive, which I have thoughts on, but that's for another time. Of like drawing 3 circles. One, what needs doing in terms of like climate crisis. What do you enjoy doing and what are you good at? I think those are the 3 things. And then wherever that overlaps. So maybe like a fun episode would be for us to like fill out our Venn diagrams and then have like a little, maybe a bonus episode or even a regular episode of us like talking through it.
Yeah, that would be cool.
That could be a cool episode. Okay.
Let's do that.
Okay. Anything else to say on soup?
I guess, what do you think? This is also something I was trying to do research, but it's quite hard to find data, or at least I didn't find any, about what is the impact of this kind of protest. So do they have a positive impact? Do they just frustrate people? I
think yes to both of those questions. I think because you're not going to get everyone on the same side of anything.
That's true.
So yeah, part of preparing for this episode, I researched what is nonviolent direct action. It's basically just geared towards stopping, slowing, or like interfering with business as usual. And in the video, Lena Norm's video about, she makes funny jokes about like field trips, like students in school having their like field trip ruined at the museum because of this. Anyway, and then there's anywhere from that to stopping like traffic by blocking a bridge. So yeah, if the goal is to disrupt people, you're gonna frustrate the people who feel disrupted. But then we're having these conversations, so I don't know. And like I said earlier, I don't have a ton of knowledge on this topic, but but then like in the end of the video, Lena says like basically in the end it worked because it was the second most read story on the BBC.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
I don't think it's a definitive like it's. I think it can be both. Like I think it seems like it has an impact, but yes, it's also frustrating people.
Yeah.
Which they might argue, these activists might argue, is part of the point.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, again, I like what you said earlier about not getting caught up in the act itself, but like the why behind it. So yeah, I guess it brings the question, how do we shift kind of the conversations away from the disruptive act itself and just talk more about why they're doing it. Because is there a disconnect there? Is that what's leading to the frustration from people?
I think potentially that's a really interesting point. And it kind of relates to something I wanted to talk about a little bit, which was how things are reported. And I really notice that often people in a lot of news reports I've read, not about the sunflowers because that had less of an personal impact, but say things where traffic gets disrupted, that there's often reported like a personal tragedy of, someone not getting to hospital on time to see a loved one. And that is, of course, a really, really shitty thing, like horrific thing for that person as an individual to go through. And I can completely understand why they would be really angry and against those protests in the face of like something, something that wouldn't normally have happened. But at the same time, that kind of reporting on these issues in that way to kind of zoom in on like a personal
it's more of an impact
impact in that situation, and being like using that it's very emotive, of course.
Like when you hear soldiers dying in war and you hear that one story and their whole life story versus the 1,000 killed, like that one person, there's science behind this, why that sticks with you more than the 1,000.
Exactly. And so I wonder if that way of reporting things doesn't help.
Because just to play devil's advocate, because I'm not saying that's not an important thing, that someone can't get to a hospital in time, but then just to play devil's advocate, so that will impact people emotionally more than say the hundreds and thousands of people who might be impacted by these oil projects.
It's really this is a different episode, but one of the I'm relating to that and like the emotion versus logic around climate change and how do we engage people. One of the speeches at COP27 was from the like president of Barbados. And I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said something along the lines of like, I don't expect you to love my island and my people as much as I do. But logically, you need to think about all of the climate refugees that are going to be, like who we already have climate refugees. That number is going to grow. And do you really want to be impacted by that? Basically addressing kind of some of the other countries. And
that's a good way to like relate it to the people he's speaking to.
Right. But it was hard hearing that because on the one hand, it makes me so sad, right? It makes me sad that the thing that might get people to act is not wanting to have to deal with climate change refugees. That's kind of brutal.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what that must have taken to do a speech like that. And, Barbados and a lot of the island nations are already being affected greatly by climate change, and the changing weather patterns and increased flooding and all of this. But then it's like, but maybe that's like an approach that he needs to take, or people take, what's going to cause these countries more pain? Climate change or climate refugees? Okay, we're going to talk about climate refugees.
I mean, if that's what moves the needle, I mean, that's like, what I said, my main takeaway from that Lena video was it's less about the like agreeing on the how, but more about, or what did I say? Yeah, agreeing on the how is not as important as like just taking action and the goal itself.
Yeah.
So, and what I found interesting about COP27, which they're trying to which was the whole other topic on like having all of these like world leaders, policy leaders flying to one place to talk about climate change. Go listen to our episode on flying. Forget which number it was, but I'll link it in the show notes. Is that they're trying to make sure we stick to the Paris Agreement and get where we need to be. But the I was vaguely aware of you mentioned in the beginning the how did you phrase it? Less like they're less kind or less accepting of like protests and activism. There are some harsh penalties for people. I was reading. I found this quote from, I think it was just Wikipedia. Oh, no, Wired. A Wired article, I think. Speaking out can be dangerous in Egypt, where human rights groups consider the president, I'm going to say his name wrong, so I'll skip that, government to be an authoritarian regime that has presided over rampant human rights abuses, including mass arrests, the killing of protesters by security forces, and the use of military trials against civilians. And so this big, important global meeting is happening from UN members is happening in this country, and I was reading the same article. They've ramped up their like security measures. They've recording taxi cabs, like audio and video, passengers and drivers. They're stopping people, taking their phones, looking at their social media.
Yeah.
And they've made a space for protesters like away from the actual like event center.
Right.
So, which, I don't know, kind of seems like it defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
This president's administration has threatened protesters with fines and imprisonment. And protesters must register for permission just to hold a rally in this like cordoned off spot, like separate from the conference.
And now tonight we have President of the United States.
Well, we're well within our 10-minute warning, so maybe try to wrap it up here.
I guess I think just on that really briefly is that it's definitely not the environment that I would prefer this kind of talks to be had in. I don't think that's great to deny protesters. But on the other hand, part of the reason this climate change is so complex is that we can't just work with people or countries that have policies or political regimes that make
it difficult or nearly impossible to protest at all.
Complex.
I don't think it's my thing either. I think having more conversations about things as they come up in the news, like if someone mentions throwing soup at a Van Gogh painting or similar protest or form of activism, to just have more of a conversation about it. Oh, like if they're putting it down or that's not effective, that's whatever the reason, just exploring that a bit more. Because the more we can talk about things, the more we can hopefully get somewhere.
Yeah. And, and like we've been talking about through this episode, just that kind of having like, you put it here in the show note, you can vote for solutions and be part of these groups' movements. It's not either or. Often these things go hand in hand. And you can also be part of groups and not be in an arrestable role.
Right.
For example.
Because
if that's something you want to do.
Ideally, we could vote for what we want and then it would happen. But that's not always the case. So that's why these activist groups exist. And it doesn't have to be either or, like what you made a note about having an abundance mindset. And just exploring how how you can help, how you can contribute more. If it's not, you don't need to join Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil, but maybe you follow them on social media or do some research about them and then have more conversations. Share this episode. Because I think this is a good, I don't know, like, I feel like I'm in a very, like, entry-level kind of position in terms of, like, activism and yeah, just exploring what, how I might be able to help. Maybe, it's this episode to start having this chat with you and, preparing for this episode.
All right.
As always, give a shit. I will leave all links and resources in the show notes, which you can find at theteaonsustainableliving.com/episode 18. Yeah, 18.
Episode 18. Woo!
And find us and follow us on Instagram at @theteaonsustainableliving. And we will see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Tea on Sustainable Living podcast.
Now, go share it with a friend,
a coworker,
a partner,
a family member,
or whoever.
A pet, your cat,
someone on the street, whoever you think could use a little more support on their sustainability journey. Share it.
You can send them over to our website, theteaonsustainableliving.com. And while you're there, check out the show notes for more info on today's topic.
All right, give a shitters. See you later. Get it? See you later, as in see you later? So funny.
Brandy.